We just heard one of the most famous and beloved of the Gospels, Jesus using the image as the Good Shepherd, or the ideal shepherd, the model shepherd, the beautiful shepherd. And Jesus uses the example of sheep because, as he tells us, sheep know the shepherd's voice. They follow the shepherd's voice. And as long as they hear the shepherd's voice when they're in danger, they know they're secure, they're safe. Domestic animals are pretty much the same. Your dog knows your voice. Your cat probably knows your voice too, but it just doesn't pay attention to your voice. In my case, I have a parrot who knows my voice, but I also know her voice as well because she talks to me. The question, of course, is whose voice are we listening to? There are a lot of voices that clamor for our attention. They want to get us to think the way they think. It's a massive amount of voices we hear today in our society from a lot of angles. And to not be swayed is very difficult. And to listen only for the voice of the shepherd is a challenge. This morning over in Europe, they're having ceremonies to mark the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camp at Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was the camp where the young lady Anne Frank was killed. And hopefully you've read that wonderful book she wrote, The Diary of Anne Frank. People scratch their heads and they look back on that era and they said, how did this ever happen? Well, it happened because many Christians began listening not to the voice of the shepherd, but to the voice of National Socialism. And things changed very quickly and very ugly. In fact, today, if you go to a German dictionary, you'll see in parentheses beside certain words, NS, which stands for National Socialism. The Nazis changed the meaning of certain words to help further their racist agenda. Likewise, in post-1917 Russia, the communists came up with the word former person. And people who were declared officially former persons were no longer relevant to the state. So they could be shipped off to places like Siberia and eventually killed. Even today we see in the debate over assisted suicide, one thing I read in the, I think, New York Times was that we shouldn't use the words suicide or killing because those sorts of words imply that we're doing something bad, something wrong. Well, yeah, we are. There are some chilling examples of how the powerful, the elites change the meaning of words in order to change a culture to support their ideology. We're seeing it right now. This week, the Supreme Court will take up oral arguments in the case involving the definition of marriage. And yesterday in Washington, D.C., the U.S. bishops supported a march for marriage, much like the pro-life march in January. And when you think of it, for thousands of years, cross-culturally, marriage has always meant a man and a woman. Even where polygamy existed or the few cases of polyandry, it was still man and woman. And true, you could find man-man relationships all throughout history. Just read Plato, read Homer, they're right there. But still, I think without any religious presuppositions, just cross-culturally, marriage has always been defined as being between man and woman, until now, that is. And I think one of the reasons it's begun to change and why so many Catholics go along with it is that we've really poorly taught what this beautiful gift of marriage is. And the voice of the shepherd, I believe, speaks to us still today through the scriptures, through the teachings of the church. We shouldn't so easily discount the voice of the shepherd because he knows things that we don't know. And just as any good shepherd truly leads us, his sheep, in protective areas to make sure they can graze and drink fresh water and be protected from predators, Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is doing the same for us. And so if we surrender his words on this teaching, we have to think what the consequences could be. So I think today, because a lot of Catholics just can't give an answer to all of this, What is it we're talking about? And why is marriage such a beautiful gift given to the human family? Where did the whole thing begin? A lot of this I've taken from a talk given by a rabbi that was entitled "The Love That Brings New Life into the World." It's really the story of how marriage came about in our society. And the story is both unexpected and rather surprising. So where did it all begin? Well, according to scientists, it all began about 385 million years ago. And they think it happened exactly in a lake in, of all places, Scotland. It was then, according to this scientific discovery, that two fish came together to perform the first instance of sexual reproduction known to science. Now, until then, all life propagated itself asexually, by cell division, think of an amoeba, or by parthenogenesis. And that was far simpler and a whole lot more economical than the division of life into male and female. How nice if I could just reproduce myself without the aid of another person. Whatever the reasons, whether this happened because of protection from parasites or immunities from disease, these two fish in Scotland discovered something new and beautiful that has been copied ever since by virtually all advanced life forms. Life begins when male and female meet and embrace. That's the simple biological, scientific foundation. Now, nature has played a role as well, as we know. Homo sapiens, humans, are bipedal, or erect. And we have larger heads and bigger brains than other creatures. And women have smaller wombs, which means baby humans are born much more premature than other animals. You know, if you've ever seen a horse or a cow be born, you understand what that means. They immediately get up and start walking, start grazing. Not so with the baby human. Baby humans need parental protection much longer than other mammals, and that requires the work of two parents. And these parents need to bond successfully to carry out the task of raising a human baby. In the animal kingdom, motherhood is universal, but fatherhood is very rare. Only in humans are both motherhood and fatherhood inextricably linked on a long-term and permanent basis. So, surprisingly, the union of biological mother and father developed only among humans to care for their child. And along with nature and biology, culture certainly played a role. You know, polygamy, which exists in about 95% of mammal species and 75% in the world's cultures, was often the norm. Polygamy is really, when you think about it, the ultimate expression of inequality, because it means that usually many males never get the chance to have a wife and a child. Polygamy, therefore, was the advantage of the powerful and the enemy of the poor. But the Bible introduced a revolutionary idea that every human being, regardless of class, color, culture, or creed, is made in the image and likeness of God. Not just kings and pharaohs or the strongest men and women, but all men and women. From this, it follows that we each have an equal right to form a marriage and to have children. And the norm presupposed by the story of Adam and Eve is one woman and one man. As it says, this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Monogamy, as we know it, did not initially become the norm, not even in the world of the Bible. But many biblical stories, such as the tension between Abraham's wives, Sarah and Hagar, or Jacob's wives, Leah and Rachel, or David and Bathsheba, or Solomon's many, many wives, all undermined polygamy. And eventually it was weeded out in favor of monogamy, which eventually became the norm. Now, it's important to know that theologically there's a deep connection between monogamy and monotheism, the belief in one God, just as the opposite is true. the connection between idolatry and adultery. Monotheism and monogamy are all about an all-embracing relationship, the I and the thou, myself and one other human being, be it a human or the divine other. And so when you think about it, monogamy really should not have won out. Most of the values of our society, let's face it, are imposed on us by ruling classes, the strong and the powerful. And the strong and the powerful stood to gain from polygamy, promiscuity, both which multiply the chance of my genes being handed on to the next generation. From monogamy, the rich and the powerful lose, but the poor and the powerless gain. Every bride and groom are royalty, every home a place that can be furnished with love. Now, aside from this, the Bible also gave us another innovation, the way the moral life was to be lived. What's remarkable about the Bible is that love, not just fairness or justice, is the driving principle of the moral life. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. 3 loves we have: God, self, and other. Or to put it another way, just as God created the natural world in love and forgiveness, so we are charged with creating the social world in love and forgiveness. And that love is the flame lit in marriage and the family. Morality is the love between husband and wife, parent and child, extended outward to the world. And this love is the basis of the moral life, was sealed by God in a covenant with his people, as we hear again and again. It's a mutual pledge of loyalty and trust between 2 or more people, each respecting the dignity and integrity of the other, to work together to achieve what neither can achieve alone. And there's one thing that God cannot achieve alone, which is to live in the human heart. That needs us. And what covenant did was situate the relationship between us and God in the terms of the relationship between the bride and the groom, husband and wife, as we hear in the beautiful words of the prophet Hosea. He says, I will betroth you to myself forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will know the Lord. Or as St. Paul would later say, marriage of man and wife reflects the love Christ has for his church. Finally, all of this helped the family home to become the central setting of the life of faith. The scriptures tell us in the book of Genesis that God chose Abraham for this purpose, not to rule over a great empire or command an army, but to be a parent. In Genesis, God explains why he chose Abraham. He says, I have known him so that he will instruct his children, his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right. And in one of the most famous lines in the Old Testament, which Jews repeat every day, says, you shall teach these things repeatedly to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house or when you walk on the way. Parents, simply put, are to be educators, and education is the conversation between generations. And the first school is the home. I think this little outline shows how the traditional family came to be, and what a remarkable thing it really is. For it brought together the sexual drive, physical desire, friendship, companionship, emotional kinship, and love. The begetting of children, their procreation and care, their early education and induction into an identity and a history. And it made sense of the world and gave it a human face, which is the face of love. Now, sadly today, almost everything that marriage has brought together has been torn apart. Sex has been divorced from love, love from commitment, marriage from having children, and having children from responsibility for their care. And the results we know are not good. 45% of children are born outside of marriage, and fewer people are marrying. And 42% of those who do marry end in divorce. and cohabitation is no substitute for marriage. The average length of cohabitation is less than 2 years. And the result is a sharp increase among young people with eating disorders, drug and alcohol abuse, stress-related syndromes, depression, and suicide. The collapse of marriage has created a new form of poverty concentrated among single-parent families, and of those, the main burden is borne by women. So what we have today are two worlds. Those who are privileged to grow up in a stable, loving association with two people who brought them into being will on average be healthier physically and mentally and emotionally. They'll do better in school and at work. They'll have more successful relationships and be happier and live longer. And yes, there are exceptions to all of that. But the injustice of it all, I think, cries out to heaven. Somehow we decided we know better than the wisdom of the ages and can defy the lessons of biology and history. The family, man, woman, child, is not one lifestyle choice among others. It's the best means we have yet discovered for nurturing future generations and enabling children to grow in a matrix of stability and love. It's where we learn the delicate dance of relationship and how to handle the inevitable conflicts that come within any human group. It's where we first take the risk of giving and receiving love. It's where one generation passes on its values to the next, ensuring continuity in a civilization. For any society, the family is the crucible of the future. And for the sake of our children's future, we must be its defenders. This little outline shows very simple truth. God worked through nature, through culture, through science, biology, to help bring about this wonderful and beautiful institution called the family and marriage. We should carefully consider what that means and what implications for changing all of that means for our society and for our future. Most of all, as Catholic Christians, we who aspire to follow the voice of the shepherd need to ask ourselves, are we really listening to his voice?
Like what you just heard? Visit Our Lady of Mount Carmel's social media pages for more faith-filled content. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Read the OLMC Tempe blog on Tumblr. Your Catholic community is online. Let's stay connected.